Do you remember the first time you sort of interacted with the entire Venmo team?
Well, it's funny. I talked to Cortina first, and Cortina sort of beat me up a little bit. He was telling me all the things I was doing wrong. But then I remember you came in behind that, and you were sort of like coming back to sort of like pick up the pieces a little bit.
It's a lot of people would describe Cortina and I salt and pepper. I'm Ikram, one of the founders of Venmo, and currently the founder of Jelly Jelly.
I'm Bill Reddy, CEO of Pinterest. I've been fortunate to work as president of commerce at Google, was COO of PayPal. I was CEO of Braintree and got to build Venmo with Ikram Magdan Ishmael and Andrew Cortina.
This is cool. The vibe is nice. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. This is fun that we get to do this.
We've come a long way since the
long way.
The first Venmo office.
That's right, yeah.
The first Venmo roof. We took a lot of phone calls.
Yeah. It's a tar roof with a plastic table on top. So this is a way better setup than that. Venmo, is still very early on. And was it 3,000 users when we started working together?
3,000 exact 3,000 actives.
Yeah,
which is nothing.
Yeah, and,
if you think about it.
And so going from that to largest financial app in the U.S. By the time we were done working together on it, that was a heck of a run, and still the most fun I ever had.
A lot of it thanks to you. You were one of the only people that spotted the potential in something like Venmo when it was that early.
I wish I could claim credit for spotting the potential in Venmo. It's really you and Cortina. It was I wanted to work with you guys. People ask me now, people would be like, Bill, you bought Venmo for $26 million. What a steal. And I'm like, well, first of all, we still have to build. Most of what you know today still had to be built. But to me, it was you and Cortina and that team. That's what I wanted to work with.
Absolutely. So, maybe not many people know this side of the story, but Venmo was in the middle of either shutting down or finding that next sort of move.
Yeah, no, that part I definitely remember, because after deciding okay, we're going to work together, I remember you called me sort of shortly after, hey Bill, actually, I already told everybody that we ran out of money and and they're not going to be employed here anymore, and so and I was
literally
okay, I'm going to wire you money for their payroll, and I remember fighting with my lawyers about that. They're like, Bill, we haven't closed a deal yet. You can't wire the money. I was like, these are the people I want to work with, and if these people aren't there, then I've got nothing. And so
I'll never forget that. We were like, what are we going to do in the next 5 days?
Yeah.
Because we're about to shut Venmo down. We had Wells Fargo calling us at the time, saying, hey, you guys got to figure something out to manage your cash balance.
Yeah. They weren't calling to give you money. They were calling to sort of say,
they were calling hey,
they're going to shut you down.
Calling me. They were calling some of our seed investors, saying, hey, you got to help these guys because we can't do this. By being a money transmitter, I guess, things you learn as first timers. It's you have to have enough to cover the risk.
I remember coming in talking to the Venmo team after we decided we were going to do something together, and they thought I was some corporate overlord coming to buy them. And it's we were sort of a startup buying another startup. We were
right.
We were maybe 100 people. You all were 10. So if you're 10 people, the company that's 100 people looks really big, but 100 people, we're still a very small company.
Very small. And I remember this, one of the people on our team I remember this, and you were there, raised the hand and was how do we know we're not getting screwed? And I was guys, that first question right there.
Yeah, oh yeah. You're guys, we're running out of money. So, Venmo was startup number 5, for me. So I'd done 4 startups prior to that. But the first 2 startups, the first one was a .com IPO. And when I tell that story, people are like, oh, well, that must have been a really great outcome. I was well, no, it was a .com crash and burn. And then the second company, the IPO date was September 11th, 2001. And so obviously way worse things on that day than the IPO not happening. But I'd sort of been in that situation of, exactly where you all were sitting of we love what we're building, but is the future going to be different?
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at it oh, that's a totally reasonable question, because I felt exactly that way when I was on that side of it.
That's awesome. I tell a lot of people, when we did that deal, you basically saved Venmo's life. So thank you for that.
No,
I could do it on camera.
We get to raise our baby together, right? It's funny, people, is sort of that sort of famous line of it. Only took 20 years to become an overnight success kind of thing.
Yeah.
When we first started working together, you all were still signing up users one by one. People think oh, well, just if you get it all right, it just rockets up towards success. And it's no, and I'll tell them, like, me and the two co-founders of Venmo, like, we would go sign up people individually. We'd go to a bar and like send $1 to every person in the bar just to get them on Venmo.
Yeah.
But we also were, we were broke and we didn't have much money. We were a little startup, and so it was like, oh, we couldn't afford to send more than
Any more than
$1.
$1, exactly.
In fact, I remember it used to be $1 was the least you could send, and so after a while, back to like how
that's true.
scrappy you have to be, we're like, hey, why don't we just make it so we can send a penny? Because we're just trying to get somebody signed up
Wow,
for it.
I
And
forgot
so
about that.
so we then said, like, make it so you can send a penny, because even sending
otherwise we're
somebody
gonna run out
$1,
of
we're
all
going
our
to
money.
run out of money.
Right, exactly.
That's right, yeah.
That is funny. I actually remember, I was like, I'm going to get that bar next to the Braintree office.
Oh, yeah.
This was close to that terminal where
Oh, getting them accepting Venmo. Yeah.
I said I'm going to get
In
them
store, yeah.
accepted, and you held me to it because I came in. I was like, I'm going to get that bar. Trust me, watch. We're going to
Yeah.
be paying there. And then next in the weekly call, the following week, you're like, by the way, Ikram, you said you're going to get that bar. I don't see them accepting Venmo.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, that's good. You're keeping me accountable.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's great teamwork. The social feed in Venmo became the defining feature of the app, and I feel like I'm like stepping into the confessional saying this now, because it was like the defining feature of the app. I didn't like it at first because
that's
it was polarizing. It was polarizing.
It was polarizing.
And
yeah.
so credit to you and Cortina that you were like, Bill, the people that love it absolutely love it. You and Cortina were able to show me like real user traction. So I think even though the number of users was really small,
Right.
there was a real spark, and that's really unique. And I was like, okay, you're right. And I believe in you guys, so I stayed the course with you guys for that reason.
I guess that was one of the moments where when you have to go against the grain like that, even with people on the team, it's pretty challenging. It was
I'd forgotten that there were a lot of people on the Venmo team that were still debating this.
Oh, we had people ready to walk out and like, we can't believe we're doing this. This is a violation of privacy and things like that. So we made it but all those voices mattered if I look back, because it forced us to tackle privacy in a way that was in line with how people wanted
That's a great point. Even the dissenters helped make the argument stronger.
Absolutely.
Sort of the iron sharpens iron kind of thing.
Yeah.
It rounded out the view, like, well, hey, there were legitimate issues to go solve, but stayed the course on like, hey, the people that love it really love it. And
Exactly.
that ended up becoming the defining feature of the app.
The stats proved it, like, because I think internally we had the term social proof, and like,
Yep.
we're not Bank of America or TD or whatever, what are the big banks, Chase, where it's there's ads everywhere, and like that instills trust, because we're a money app at the end of the day. Ultimately, why we decided to roll with it, it served as the trust mechanism for why people would join. If you see your friends on there, you automatically trust it. Would we do that in today's time? That's the question. What's your take? Imagine if we were to launch Venmo today, would we have a feed? Given how social media works, that's the
that's a great question, and it's almost 15 years later, and it's the world's such a different place. I think one, we've learned so much about where social media can be helpful, where it sometimes is not very helpful, but I think there's things, when I think about for entrepreneurs starting today, I think there are some things that I look at and say like, oh my gosh, if only we could have had that. And, people don't realize like Braintree got started just before Venmo. So we were actually running our own data center, or we were like renting space in a data center to run our own servers. Venmo starting just a little bit after that. Well, of course, you're in Amazon Web Services,
Right.
and you're like, why would I ever step foot in a data center? Just in those couple years difference.
That's crazy.
And so I look at startups today, we're like, well, they've never even imagined that. But then, they've got AI coding tools, and they can vibe code and like all these things.
Right,
That's so much stuff that we had to go build. And so it's sort of hard to imagine. And I think that the building of the product itself, I think by every objective measure, could have gone way faster today because you have AI coding tools and things like that. The thing that I don't know if it would still exist today, or might be harder today, is getting the distribution of that. The mobile and social ecosystems were just forming, and so we were at a unique moment in time that gave us faster distribution,
Right.
because people sort of figuring out like, oh, they didn't have an existing mobile app to do something. There's an app for that.
Right.
Well, Venmo was the first. There's an app for that for money. Venmo is the first. So I don't know what I'd do for that today.
Do you remember when we first met?
Thinking at an Excel like entrepreneurs event.
That was the first time actually Cortina and I were ever at sort of like a fancy gathering for founders. I didn't have any dress clothes, and I actually bought my clothes right an hour before I met you. That's where we first sort of crossed paths.
Yeah. I get asked this question all the time by other entrepreneurs. So I'd love your take on it, which is you've had the experience multiple times of selling to a larger company. Now, Venmo to Braintree is only like a slightly larger company, but then, together we sold Venmo and Braintree to PayPal.
Right.
And so then you had that experience. And so what was the experience like of selling to a larger company? And then also, how did you think about sort of maintaining sort of the authenticity and spirit of what we had set out to do, even in the larger company?
So we were evaluating lots of things. One morning, I opened up the Venmo feed, and I had seen you paid John Donahoe and said, hey, welcome to Venmo. Here's how it works. It was almost like a handshake. You guys had a handshake of this is it. And that was, I called Cortina after that. I said, something is telling me that we're going to be part of PayPal. If I had to look back on sort of these acquisitions we went through, it's like one thing that was the most challenging is growing from a baby to an adult in very different settings in like the span of 5 years. Like Venmo to Braintree then Venmo Braintree to PayPal was like a growth spurt.
Yeah.
Where I've learned from you, actually watching you do it, is just handling that at every step of the way. So when I look at Jelly, I'm kind of like, okay, if we started going through that, now I know how to tackle it. Whereas the first time around, it was just a giant learning curve.
It was great to have the grounding with the team, right?
Right.
Like, I actually really appreciated it, because Venmo and Braintree were still smaller. Like, as I then was asked to take on, being COO of PayPal, and we had a lot of rebuilding to do in PayPal, I loved being able to go back to the core Venmo teams and the core Braintree teams, where people were still closer to the end user, closer to the customer. I think one of these things that's the most challenging as companies get larger is that the people doing the building get further and further removed from the customers they're trying to build for.
That's a great point.
One of the biggest determinants of success is like, how good is the feedback loop between the customer and the person who's hands-on keys building something for the customer. And the bigger the company gets, it's just like the telephone game. The more hops there are between the customer and the person who's building. Selling into a larger company, you get to see like, oh my gosh, there's like 25 hops, between the customer and the person who's building, at least 25 hops, sometimes more. And so a lot of the sort of things that worked best for me were like, okay, how do I just short circuit that and just like collapse that feedback loop?
Yeah, that's very important.
But it's really hard to do it at scale. Even at Pinterest now, something I work really hard towards, like, oh, when I have questions on some of these things, like, well, I'm going to go talk to customers directly. I'm going to go find some users to talk to directly. Because like there's no substitute for just like that direct
and watching
customer
them,
feedback.
Watching them use it if you can.
That's right.
And things like that.
That's right.
Like we do that all the time. Like everyone's required when we push something new, go sign someone up.
Yeah.
Well, partly to get new users.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you get disconnected, I think it's very tough.
How do you think about the difference between like founding a business versus running a business at scale?
I think founders run the best businesses. That's my conclusion in today's time, which means like, because when you're a founder or you start something from scratch, or no matter when you get in, you're craving knowledge on how things are working. And you'll do whatever you can to figure that out. And if you see a problem, you'll fix it. And a lot of people don't have that drive. I don't know.
It's somebody else's job to do that.
It's either, you have to hire someone to do that. But when it's like, I probably even today, even though I'm not on the Venmo team directly, I have 500 billion things that I would fix immediately.
You still send in, bug reports.
Right. I'll start sending them to Pinterest now when I start, because I know I can, because you care.
An early mentor said this to me, a really great entrepreneur, Dana Bowers. I've talked a lot about how she was the first entrepreneur that I worked with. And, she had this saying that, as an entrepreneur, you start out as chief cook and bottle washer. You basically have to do all the jobs. Now, as you scaled, the other part of that is that, okay, you start out as chief cook and bottle washer. And if you succeed, you're sort of giving away a part of your job every day from that point forward. Mm-hmm. But because you've done all the jobs, you have sort of this proximity to it,
right?
That it's probably harder to walk by a broken thing and let it stay broken, because you've been there, you've seen how important that is, and so you can't walk by the broken thing, and you can't help yourself but want to fix all those issues.
You want to get into everything, and sometimes to a fault, because people are like, oh, I got this. So what time do you normally wrap up for the day?
That's 24/7. Try to get home for dinner and bedtime stories. That's making the bedtime stories. That's a big deal. We spent years and years together building, and
Right.
got to do some things that turned out to really matter. And I certainly loved it. It was formative for both of us. But in a lot of ways, I'm envious because like you're building a startup again. In a lot of ways, like I miss that. But I'm curious if we swapped roles
Right.
today.
I would be the CEO of Pinterest.
Yeah,
if we swapped roles,
that's right-
which
that's
would be-
right.
Which would be wild.
But how do what do you think would happen if we swapped roles today?
Whew, that's a very interesting question. So, well, I think it would be very easy for you to handle because you've done it. You've been at day one. I have actually never been at the helm of a massive company, so I think it would be a big learning experience for me. I'm up for. I would be up for the challenge, but I would have to basically think before I do. Like I think when you're in startup world, you just do while you're thinking a lot of the time. So like even like for example, part of how we build Jelly is like, if you have an idea, build it. Show us. Like this was part of the Venmo ethos too. It's like build it, prove it to me.
But in so many ways, that's the thing that companies lose as they get larger. And actually, the world's changing so fast. Innovation is always moving quickly. It's moving at hyperspeed now. In a lot of ways, that's the thing that's hard for big companies to keep. And so,
Well, yeah, I think that's probably what I would have to adapt to. It's how to kind of look at things from a more like a bigger picture. But how do you would you be able? Like, here's the real question: would you be able to get into a company where three, day one,
here's the thing: like it's
given where you are now?
Since we together sold Braintree and Venmo to PayPal, that was end of 2013. That's 13 years ago. So for 13 years, I've kept. It's sort of like a dream deferred. I keep saying like, oh, I'm gonna go back and do another startup from zero again.
And you haven't really done another startup since that.
Well, it's like how do you mess with perfection, right? It's just so good working with you and Cortina and the team, right? So,
No, it's tough. It's
But I think so. As much as that's been a dream deferred, I still try to operate that way. But to your question of like what it'd be like for me coming into the early stage startup, like there's so many new tool sets. There's so many in like we're using them, but like when I talk to other startups, like it just blows my mind how I thought we moved quickly way back when.
Right.
You hear about these like startups. There's like it's one person that's building things that would have taken us 100 people way back then, right? So and so that's native for you. You're just living it right now. So that's
One of the pros and cons to an early stage startup is pro. You could ship anything anytime, and you don't have to worry about necessarily affecting millions or hundreds of millions of users at once. So you can make a couple mistakes here or there, and it's okay. But you can't let that be a habit.
But actually, you're sort of doing a Venmo. I don't know if you call it 2.0 or 3.0.
I call it 3.0. Venmo 3.0.
Yeah. So tell me about that. So you're actually doing that. So you asked me that question, but you're doing it. You're building a startup today. So how do you find it different?
Yeah. So I think a lot of my frustrations, and I think a lot of people's frustrations, are centered around two things. One, it's hard to transact globally. And then two, the mainstream social media today, it's becoming filled with a bunch of AI slop. There's a lot of sort of fake, very filtered, overproduced content.
Sort of both ends, either overproduced or AI slop. And so how do you get real authenticity?
There you go.
Yeah.
you know what?
It's like we've done this together before. So it's like we built something
This is
together
why
before.
I need you on the team, man. No, but
So what are you doing about that, though? How do you handle that?
So one of the things, looking back at Venmo, it still has a dose of reality because it's ultimately two or three people, or friends sharing moments. That's a real thing that we know happened. So if we extend on that, what if we did that around video and payments? So that's Jelly. It's a place to make videos, and along with it, you can make payments. And the difference between how we're built now versus how we did it at Venmo is it's on the blockchain. What does that do? It opens us up to everyone being able to transact globally in a social medium that feels right today.
Yeah. I just think there's so many through lines of like stuff that we sort of figured out early on together working on those things. Like I still carry with me like, oh yeah, like what was the power of a small forum, where it's like, oh, instead of sharing where I had dinner at with 1,000 people I hadn't seen since college, I'm just going to share it with like the 10 or 20 people I actually split meals with on Venmo,
Or
and then it's
people that you
appropriate
see,
to say, or
right.
people that you see.
Right.
And so that notion of like, what's the appropriate form? What's an authentic experience? Like, we're building different things around that in Pinterest today, but still carrying a lot of that spirit
It's
forward.
the
You're
same
doing
theme.
thing with
It's the
Jelly.
theme of authentic human connection.
That's right. When I came into Pinterest, it was declining in users. Revenue had decelerated down to single-digit growth. Profits had were declining dramatically, and the narrative was that Pinterest had missed the next generation. And normally for a consumer mobile app, if once you miss the next generation, you don't get it back. You don't hear about apps becoming cool again. It was right after I came into Pinterest, we made the decision to turn off social features for users under 18 and to completely remove them for users under 16, to be private only for users under 16. It was very controversial inside the company not because people didn't believe in the principle of it. To say that out loud, it's not safe for kids under 16 to be contacted by strangers online. You say things like, well, yeah, of course, but why hadn't anybody else done it?
Right.
Well, because the business pressure of that, now that more than half the platform is Gen Z now, but we were like nowhere with Gen Z at the time. And people thought, when we did that, people thought like, oh, well, now you're never going to win the next generation. Now you're definitely dead with young users. And it ended up being core to how we won with young users. And so now everybody's like, oh my gosh, what a great decision. At the time, it was
That's huge.
It's very risky. Like, our stock dropped significantly when that happened. We actually took a hit in users initially when we did that. But it only took a few quarters. But a year later, we were consistently growing with users again. And so that worked. But there was tremendous pressure in that people thought it was going to wreck the company.
To me, it makes sense now.
Yeah,
And that's the thing.
It's one of those things. Like, later on, these things make sense, but at the time, they're hugely
It just
controversial.
doesn't. It's not necessarily. Not necessarily the decision I would make. To be honest.
Yeah, and hopefully it's a very, very long time from now. But hopefully, when I'm old and gray and sort of looking back on life, I think it'll be one of the things I'm most proud of having done. And if you talk to anybody in tech who has kids, they'll talk about how they keep their own kids off of social media, how they try to keep their kids off of devices as long as they can. And so, it shouldn't be a controversial thing to say, oh, we want to build things that are actually in the best interest of our users.
Conducive to kids growing up.
That's exactly right. So from a first principles perspective, like, that was sort of the guide point. But again, I think that's one of the things that as an entrepreneur, you're willing to bet with the courage of your conviction.
My girlfriend was saying Bill looks a little like Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh,
From that actress.
check his Venmo seed to see how much I paid him to say that. I'm gonna need a lot of help from AI to pull that one off.
It's true.
Our last direct work together, has been like 8-9 years ago. So it's been a little while. But I still draw a lot of inspiration from my work with you and Cortina and the team. And my what would Ikram do kind of moments tend to be ones where it's like, okay, we got to do something like really bold. And so I still remember a moment where I had just introduced you to John Donahoe for the first time, like right after we did the deal with eBay and PayPal, and Apple Pay was just coming out. And so we were talking about like, oh, well, how's PayPal going to compete with Apple Pay? And just like instinctively, you're like, we're gonna have to build a phone. Now, we didn't end up building a phone, but just like that kind of bold thinking, it's just like it's one that sticks in my head of just like, you're always willing to like go to like the boldest answer.
Go for it. You got to go for it.
And then you work back from that of like, okay, well, we didn't build a phone, but then like, okay, it sort of just pushed the thinking to like
Let's get
a
on
really
all the
bold
phones.
place. Yeah.
I'm definitely always telling the team this is what Bill would do, or this is how Bill would tackle this. I often think of how Bill would communicate something, or how you would communicate something when I'm talking to the team. You just have that, you just have the vibe. You just know what the vibe is. One thing that I love about sort of your being is where you come from. And the stories that I remember the most are you telling me, like, all the odd jobs you've worked in college. Because a true entrepreneur at Spirit. So you grew up in a small town. What was that like, and how has that sort of impacted your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring this one back to you in a second. You've had an amazing journey as well, but in a lot of parallels, I think, in our journeys. But yes, I grew up in a little town in Kentucky, and Silicon Valley might as well have been like going to the moon. I actually never even dreamed of that. I was first in my family to go to college. Didn't have health insurance growing up. Like my goals for going to college were not to go start companies in Silicon Valley or be an entrepreneur or run tech companies. My goal was like, I wanted to own a home and I wanted to be able to have health insurance for my family. And like, okay, if I go to college, I can do that. And I was fortunate in that the dot-com was like just getting going. And I didn't know what I wanted to do in college. A lot of people, especially a lot of like tech entrepreneurs, like, oh yeah, I grew up like tearing down Commodore 64s and stuff like that. We couldn't afford a computer. In the high school I went to, even in the mid 90s, we still had typing class. We didn't have computers to use. Wow. And so when I got to college, I didn't know how to use a computer. But I was like, I think this internet thing's gonna be important. I should figure out, something to do with this internet thing. So I, became a computer science major, had a scholarship for tuition, but not for living expenses. I was terrified to take on debt. And so I was working 2 or 3 jobs to put myself through school. And through a friend, met a serial entrepreneur, Dana Bowers, who had multiple successful startups, and she wanted to build an online banking company. She was looking for engineers.
Oh, wow. And, so you joined her.
Yeah, that's right. I joined her. And so as came onto her team. I was, like the 5th employee on her team. And from the ether, we created something that hundreds of banks were using. And so then I was sort of hooked on this, like, oh, from nothing, you can go build something.
So you back in the day, you were writing code.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You're one of the few CEOs that you can write the code, you can evaluate the code, and you can run the company.
I would say, I don't know if I could write the code anymore, but now there's vibe coding, so I can definitely vibe code. But yeah, I started as an engineer. But I think, to your question of like sort of the background that's sort of coming up, it was initially entrepreneurship was out of necessity for me. And then I figured out like, wow, I love building. And, that first company, even though it was sort of a dot-com crash and burn, that product still runs today. People would come up to me like, Bill, you're that guy from the code, because I actually signed my code. And I used to put my cell phone number in the code.
Like Bill Ready?
Yeah. I signed my code
number.
And
That's
I put my
amazing.
cell phone number so in case somebody had an issue, they could call me. And I had to change that phone number.
I had to change mine too.
I remember you and Cortina had your phone numbers as the customer support numbers for
mine
Venmo
was
in the early days.
Connected to the Better Bureau.
Yeah, the Better Business Bureau. Yeah,
Better Business Bureau, and I was getting death threats, and they were like, it was bad. So I was like,
yeah, I forgot that you and Cortina had your phone numbers as the customer service numbers for Venmo.
At first, I thought it was fun. Like I thought when I'm 90, I'll be taking customer support calls.
Yeah,
and people would call, and I'd be like, "Hey, what's up? Hey, I have an issue
Not
with
so
Venmo."
much. Yeah.
But then it got.
But this background of like sort of, on the one hand, I think people would say to me like, well, was it a disadvantage coming from a place where you didn't have a computer, or you didn't even know Silicon Valley was a thing you could aspire to, or whatever. And, if you'd have asked me then, I said, well, yeah, that made it way harder. If you ask me now, I say, no. I think one of the biggest predictors of success is resilience. And is sort of that path up of having to like sort of scratch and claw for those things is like one of the biggest predictors of success, certainly in entrepreneurship or building a company. And I didn't know that's what I was gaining at the time. I just thought like, oh, it was really freaking hard. But it was building resilience. But I got to ask you the same thing. We came from different places, but both the places we came from might as well have been a million miles away from Silicon Valley. So tell me yours, because we have a kinship in that.
Yeah, no, I mean, so for me, immigrant story. Like my mom and dad, all they wanted was for me to have something to look forward to work towards. I remember my dad was like, $60K a year. That's your target. Like, what if you get $60K a year?
You're set.
You're set. That was it. He's like, just make $60K a year. But yeah, I was born in Zimbabwe, and I followed my mom basically to the U.S., all over Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda, here. And I think I learned from her that my first dose of entrepreneurship and what it was like, because she ran a Montessori school in our basement. So I was actually like helping to teach Montessori kids early on, while I was in the middle of high school. So I saw her work, and she was like, running the school, cooking, doing everything for me, and just basically power woman. And just to make $50K a year, basically, to make ends meet for all of us as a family. Similar to you, it's like for me was just going after $60K a year, and then it all really came to life when I met Cortina. When I had kind of like a buddy to go through with.
And you all met as roommates at Penn, right?
We met as roommates in college, and Venmo wasn't the first thing we did. It was we had.
These are some great stories. All the little odd.
We had restaurants that we were trying to sign up. We had.
How'd you all get paid for the first website you built? What currency were you paid in for that first website?
Paid in sandwiches.
Sandwiches, free sandwiches.
kebab rolls. Like exactly.
Yeah.
So we and he had a very similar background to you or me in that didn't come from much.
Yeah.
But really worked hard. So I think hard work and entrepreneurship combined was the sauce for all of us.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.